Hey, welcome to the Treehouse Athenaeum. We're really excited you could join us today. Take a seat or maybe a walk as we jump into some topics you probably wondered about. From deciphering dreams to following your wildest intuitive hits, we've definitely got something for you. Let's get started.
All right, welcome back to the Treehouse Athenaeum podcast, everyone. Today I'm here with Jenny, and what are we talking about today, Jenny?
And introduce yourself, Daniela.
Oh, I'm Daniela. Yeah, that's important.
So we are here because we got in a conversation. The Treehouse, our group as a whole, has been talking about how do we better clarify who and what we are and what we're bringing to the people. And in that conversation, we were talking about how to talk about the tools and everything that we tend to have on our e-learning platform. And it evolved in this conversation around our future selves. And initially we were sort of going in a different direction with this podcast, but then you said something really profound. And I was like, that's what we need to talk about because it ties right back into the treehouse. Do you remember what you said, how you said it?
Yes. In the scope of future selves, I was talking about how with the tools, I didn't really understand what was readily available to me as an option for my future until I got the tools to understand myself.
Yeah. And so when you say tools, what kind of tools are you talking about? Like, this is not like hammers and pipe wrenches, right? Like, what kind of tools are we talking about here?
What came to mind for me just off the cuff was Enneagram. I think that was the thing that really catapulted me into a lot of understanding of self. Mm-hmm. And with that understanding of self, I kind of took that a step further and used that to really push myself in shadow work. I think I've just somehow always been doing shadow work my entire life and didn't really know that that's what it was called. So now having a name for that tool as well. So it's kind of like a combination of tools, but Enneagram really is the one that kind of gave me the right language and made me see the whole picture.
Yeah. So if I hear you, when we're talking about tools, we're talking about things that help us to get to know ourselves on a deeper level. So I heard you say the shadow work, which we'll come back and share with folks a little bit more about what that is. I know we've done a podcast on Enneagram, but we can even, jump into that a little bit more for you. Mm-hmm. Some of the ones I know I will throw out. As a matter of fact, I'm looking at the corner of my desk, and no kidding, it's a stack of folders this tall. And these are only the self-assessments that I've done over the years. Like that doesn't include all of the other stuff that I've done with coaching, of being coached, not me coaching other people. So there's other things like in the corporate world, a lot of times people will be exposed to things like the DISC and the Kobe and the Strengths Finder, and Enneagram's actually coming more into the corporate world. So more people are a little bit more. There's another tool that I'm not going to touch on because it's not a valid tool that ends with Briggs. It's not. Yeah. That other tools that I'd like to throw out to people to consider. I mean, there's just such a vast, I forgot some of the tools I was looking at. I took this thing called a 16 personalities test, human design. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I've done a lot of emotion code work, right? That's relying on someone else to use that tool, but that still takes cooperation and learning that self or having that feedback come back from someone else. Evolutionary astrology is swooped in and given me the keys to the universe for myself and everyone else. And that's been enlightening. But I just want to throw some other ideas out to folks so they have a better idea of what other assessments. I mean, even mystically speaking, is using tools like tarot, and for those who are aware of things like shamanism and Akashic records and those kind of things, like anything that helps us to get to understand the depths and crevices of who and what we are so we can make more powerful choices. And I think we'd all like to run around this world and think, I live in this body, therefore I must know myself.
Yeah.
But if that was the case, we'd all be living in a really different looking world. So we're trying to figure it out.
Right. There would be no future self because you would already be that person if you really did have that intimate awareness. Yeah. And we all want to be, I don't want to say somebody else. That's the wrong language. We all have an aspiration, and we all have this idea of, when I'm at this stage of my life, I'll be like this. But if without a path to get there, that's all it's ever going to be. And without that introspection of like, how am I going to get there? And I think it really starts with that wanting that introspection, and then the tools, like whatever tool that you kind of grab onto and that speaks to you, is the what's going to start laying the groundwork. Because I mean,
Yeah.
really, even meeting you and learning about evolutionary astrology, it's like that came in and had its own, shake up for me too, the way the
Yeah.
Enneagram did.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes each tool has its purpose, and yeah, it's so important to laying the
Yeah.
groundwork to get where you want to go.
You made such a valid point about you can have the dream, but if you don't have the pathway to get there, like I just think of some of the ebbs and flows in my life when I was a teenager and easily going into like my late 20s. I was really big on goal setting. Like, and I forgot what it's called. It's called SMART or whatever now, but like, I forgot what the formula was called then. But I mean, I'd get clear on what my goal was. I'd break it down into the pieces. And I mean, sometimes I would just write it down and almost forget about it the rest of the year. And I'd look at the end of the year and I'd be like, wow, like I knocked that out. And then I'd hit some really tough times in my life. And I was like, all right, I just need to get here. And just having enough of like, I'll be really candid. There were some really tough periods in my life that the goal setting was actually kind of driving me mad because too many variables were popping up in my life. And I didn't have things like evolutionary astrology yet to better understand what was happening. So I just really had to like throw a North Star out there. And that was at least enough. So, because if you don't have that understanding, go just any which way the wind takes us, right?
Yeah.
So I was still kind of swaying with the wind, but at least I felt like a little tethered to something out there
Yeah.
at the time.
And yeah. And that's so funny. Like mentioning the Akashic Records, I just got my Akashic Records done. And I'm probably not the best at explaining what that is, so bear with me. But it's kind of like a spiritual catalog of your soul, I think is probably a good way to describe it.
That's a good layman's explanation of what it is. Yeah. There's the Google out there. People can use Google.
Yeah. Don't quote me. I'm not the expert on this. What I learned in this, though, that kind of shocked me and corroborated some things. I think, honestly, Jenny, I think you're one of the people that she unknowingly corroborated and when she told me this, but she was like, you're kind of a master manifester. And this comes with a bad side, unfortunately, that you are as good as you are at manifesting the good, you are equally as good at manifesting the bad.
Yeah.
And she used different language. She called it something else.
Blue light.
Yes.
Yeah.
Blue light. Yeah. And I was like, oh, and she's like, you really have to know what you want. And also you have to keep like kind of your head clear.
Yeah.
And you were one of the people that recently told me you kind of have to have like, you have to know what you want. You have to know where you're going. And I thought about that because the same thing, like just being, having goals and them not coming about, I was just kind of like, well, maybe I need to like make them more vague. And really what I was doing was trying to appease myself more. Yeah. Because if I make my goals more vague, it doesn't really matter how I get it. Or, like if my goal is to own a house, okay, I have a house. Is it the house that I wanted though?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So, that kind of hit me in the face because I was like, I've been too free flowing and really I do know what I want and I need to get back on the horse of like, okay, this is what I want and figuring that out. But again, without that tool, I wouldn't have I wouldn't have had that realization.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up. I too have that. And I've known it. I didn't know it was called that, but I've known that my entire life. And I've watched that happen. Like it's frustrating, but I know it can be frustrating. I know a lot of the miserable things I've experienced in my life was me just kind of toggling around and being like, I want to experience this and see what this is. And then I'm in it. And then I'm like, oh, what was me? And there's some things on my natal chart that, this it's just kind of how I play in the mud sometimes to learn life and gain experience. But the reason I'm bringing my experience into it too is having that conversation with her as well. I was already having that conversation with myself in the years leading up to the conversation I had with her. But there was a level of hearing someone confirm what I already knew that took my personal accountability to a whole other level.
Yes.
Like a whole other level. Like even in the follow-up conversations that I've had with her, I mean, quite frankly, and I said I wasn't going to cuss in podcasts anymore, but it's happening. There's just like no bullshitting anymore, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, it's really helping me to show up so much more powerfully in my own life now, to hold space for other people. And
yeah,
just when I think I can't get more compassionate, get even more compassionate. Because the truth is we all manifest this way. Some of us, depending on how we're designed in this lifetime, are a bit more of a master manifester for a back away, but we all create our own experiences. And I can already feel like the stuff getting thrown at the computer from some people who are like, I did not create this shit. And I hear you. I hear you. Like there's a lot that happens in our lives that is out of our control. And to bring it back to the tools, when we get to know ourselves, it gives us some level of control because then we have the power of choice and how we respond to things.
Yes.
Like the people who stand out to me most in history are the people who, man, like Frederick Douglass and Nelson Mandela. Like those are, I have their pictures up on my wall because it's just to be in the kind of circumstances to keep that level of focus and to keep going within, to get to know oneself so they can figure out how to show up in the world. Like that's it, right? It doesn't matter how dire or how amazing our circumstances are. If we don't know ourselves, right, it can turn into, all right, this is going to be my third time cussing on this podcast and I'll stop. It just turn into a total shit show. Like, so it's really helpful. It's really helpful. And I loved it when you said that when we were gaming for this conversation of, I didn't even know it was possible for my future until I started tapping into these tools. I'm like, that's so true.
Yeah,
it's true. I mean, I've worked with some top level executives. It's, people make the assumption because people in these really top powerful places and positions that they know it all and they've got it all. And they're people just like us too. They need the support. They need the tools, take the information. And I mean, that's how those folks succeed. Most of them. It's getting to know themselves and then knowing how to apply who and what they are to the world and going with it. Like, yeah.
Well, and the reason that it even came up, we were talking about, how do we talk about future self to maybe people who are still introductory into this world. And really, I kind of was thinking back to, people who kind of discredit astrology and stuff like that. And, screw the system. I can be whoever I want to be. Absolutely. I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
But if you know where you're starting from, it can definitely, like, someone who has a sourdough starter and someone who doesn't is going to be in a different place at making bread.
Yeah.
So it's like, where do you...
That's a great example.
How are you gonna get there? And I think I said this in probably the Enneagram podcast, but if the person that you want to be is so wildly outside of who you actually are, how is that really going to feel to just wear a mask all the time?
Yeah.
So it's and then that's kind of where the shadow work piece comes in, because you're digging deep and figuring out why you're trying to be this person that's totally opposite. But either way,
share a little bit more, just in case folks don't know what shadow work is. Can you first define a little bit what shadow work is, and then even share how it's helped you become even who you are today, like how you incorporated it?
Yeah. So shadow work is kind of like digging into the deeper, darker parts of you that probably you don't really want to look at. So a lot of those uglier emotions that you may try to tamp down, or some of those feelings that you may just shove in a closet and you just want to lock the door and never talk about them. It's kind of going through those. And shadow work, I think the easiest way to start it is when you feel uncomfortable, kind of really digging into that one thing and just like tunneling down to figure out the root of it. So it doesn't have to be, if you're wondering how to get started, it doesn't have to be this grand thing that you're like, oh, I'm going to open this door and look at all the things that cause me shame and all the things that, you know, cause my depression or cause my anxiety. It can be easier, or not easier, but it can be simpler if you just, you know, if you're in your daily life and you're like, ooh, that hit me wrong, and start there.
Can you give an example? Like,
yeah, I mean, trying to think of like a really simple example, but say that you're at a restaurant or something.
now speak about yourself. Let the people get to know you, Daniela.
Yeah. So yeah. I was trying to think of easy. Nothing I ever do is easy. So there is one thing, and this is a story I was saying that one time. Astrology, but like intro level astrology, like sun sign astrology, made me realize, because Scorpio is my sun sign, and Scorpios can be really obsessive and possessive. And I learned that, and I was like, "Ooh, yeah, that's true." I can be and was in high school extremely, like, just very, very much like my best friend was my best friend. And looking back, it makes me cringe because I'm like, God, get over yourself. But
it would have made great TV. That's what Mean Girls and 90210 and all those shows are made out of. So
for sure,
good character work.
My best friend, her sun sign is Gemini. So if we're going just based on just sun sign astrology, you already see probably where this is going if you understand the difference between Scorpio and Gemini.
Yeah.
So yeah, she was very much a social butterfly in high school, and everyone loved her, and she was very likable, and still is very likable. Like, she's the best. But it's just, people like grabbed onto her really easily, and I couldn't handle it because I was like, I'm someone who really likes to keep a small circle. I am not a social butterfly. I am not immediately likable. Like, I cannot walk into a room and work the room. Like, I'm quiet, you know, like I'm a little bit more reserved until I am more comfortable to open up. And that was definitely me in high school.
Yeah.
And so when someone else got really close to her and started using like the best friend, and I can't even say it's one person, but there were several moments of this, but it was one person in particular that like made us blow up. To this day is the only fight we've ever had. And to date myself, MySpace was a thing.
Well, just so the folks know, the lady didn't make you blow up. She hit your trigger.
Yes. Oh,
you didn't know your shadow work yet.
Right. No, I didn't know. Right. I didn't know.
Right.
So MySpace was still a thing. And if you're not familiar with MySpace, we used to have like one of the features was a MySpace top 8. And with that, you basically ranked your friends. It's really terrible looking back, but you ranked your friends. So it was always like your best friend, if you're a girl's girl, your best friend, and then your boyfriend, and then all your other friends on your top 8. Sometimes it could have been your boyfriend, whatever. But I always put my girlfriends up at the top, and then my boyfriend, and then, you know, the rest of my like close friends. But when you're best friends or like dating someone, you expect to be their like number 1 or number 2. And that was like, you know, that's on MySpace. That's who you could tell like their group was and like their person. So we got into this big fight because I got so mad that she was like hanging out with this other girl who was like calling her best friend, and I like couldn't deal. And she called me, and we had this big fight. And it again is the only fight we've ever had. But at the end of that fight, it went unresolved, which is also another thing like I don't like to do. If we're gonna have a fight, we're gonna resolve it right then and there.
Yeah.
And at the end of that fight, I want to say one of us hung up, but she got on MySpace and took me off the number 1 spot.
Demoted
didn't move
you.
me to number 2. She moved me to number 3. And I was like, really. And so shortly thereafter, being able, like, we, you know, made up really quickly, but learning then, not long after that situation, that Scorpios can be obsessive and possessive, I was like, ooh, actually, like, this just happened recently, and now I understand why people don't like it. And I didn't know, I would not have called my behavior obsessive or possessive when it was happening, because to me, I was just having an emotion. Like I was just
Yeah.
really intensely having an emotion. And I don't know that I would have known to label it that, especially in high school.
Yeah.
So learning that, and then kind of, it took years. It didn't happen overnight. Like I definitely wasn't cured in high school. And I definitely don't think I'm cured now. It's just in remission. But it took years of me being able to recognize when those emotions would start to flare up. And it was just because I did the shadow work. So I would ask myself, okay, what about this situation right now makes me uncomfortable, and why is
Hmm.
it triggering my possessiveness? Do
Hmm.
I not, like, what is making me not trust that this person is still going to consider me close
Yeah.
or in their circle, or what is making me think that they could possibly betray me in some way? And
Yeah.
so, like, really try just like ciphering through all of that, and figuring out what exactly the root cause was of being possessive. And like in that situation, looking back, I can see it was abandonment. Like I was afraid that she was going to think that this other person was cooler. And like now as an adult, I know we can have multiple best friends. Like it doesn't have to be this
Yeah.
thing. But yeah,
Well,
back then,
I was going to
that
ask you,
shadow
like,
work.
yeah. So getting that awareness, th- share a little bit about how that has supported you and the person you are today, and even the person that you're becoming 10 years from now. Like, how has that poured into you and supported the choices that you make and how you show up in the world and the way that
Yeah.
you desire?
I think learning that, or maybe see, because like I said, I think I've been doing shadow work for longer than I've known or understood the term shadow work. I think building that curiosity and nurturing that curiosity from a younger age is really what kind of helps me see the way forward. Because kind of going back to that original question, how do you know how do you know how to get there?
Yeah.
And so for me, really getting, like, digging really deep into, why is this a goal in the first place? Because
Yeah.
I need to understand things. And I just need to, like, that's part of my nature. I just need to understand. But I need to understand why we're going in this direction in the first place. And
But
so,
that's also a flowing part of, like, a little bit of, sorry for the interruption there, but a little bit
no.
of the astrology piece there. Scorpio is ruled by Pluto, right? So that is getting, it's also natural, right? The flowing harmonious side of Scorpio is, like, deeply curious
Mhm.
and, like, going down a layer and then a layer after layer after layer. Like, that's, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
And I'm
developing.
not really afraid of change. I never really have been. I mean, that doesn't mean that I've loved every single change that's happened in my life, but I like the idea of metamorphosis.
Hmm.
So curiosity, I think, supports that. So just continue to be introspective, and if you're paying attention, you can witness the transformation in progress. And even when you're kind of checked out and still being kind of curious and still doing some of that work, at the end of that road, you're going to look back when you're in a new situation that would have triggered you before and it's not. And you're
Yeah.
like, oh, this is 2.0 or 3.0 or 4.0.
Yeah.
And you did it and you didn't even realize.
Well, folks, if you don't want to ever subscribe to any of our stuff in the future, she just gave you the keys to the universe right there of curiosity and introspection, perpetually doing that. And you wouldn't need the tools.
Yeah.
And the tools are really helpful because sometimes it gets a lot exhausting.
Yeah.
Not a little, a lot exhausting,
Yeah.
perpetually looking at yourself versus, like, let me just sit down and do this assessment. Let me just sit down with a coach. Let me sit down and look at my chart. Let me learn about my Enneagram, like any of these things, and to be able to compile it more quickly. And then you've got your tools right there in front of you in your
Mhm.
guidebook. So
Yeah.
it makes it less of a heavy lift.
Well, and I like that evolutionary astrology, you can kind of track the progress too. Like, what about evolutionary astrology pulled you in that way?
Wow. Because it's the blueprint of who we are. Like there's like no escaping it. And I know, like, even though astrology is like gaining more momentum again in this time, I also hear a lot of detractors. Like I was listening to a Trevor Noah podcast like a month or two ago, and the person he interviewed, he said, "What's the one thing that annoys you the most?" And he was like, "Astrology," and he just came out so strong. And I heard his reasoning, and I get it. I get why some of it comes off so fluffy, because there is historically, up until, I don't know, maybe just even in the last 20, 30, 40 years again, it's becoming, there's science behind it. It's ancient science. Mm-hmm. So the shortcut is, instead of me trying to sell people on astrology, the reason it's so like it connected with me so much is, well, my mentor, the first time I sat down with him 3 years ago, and he showed me the chart, and I was like, wait, what is this? Right? Because I came from more like understanding to sun astrology, right? I'm a Taurus and read books, and I'm like, a lot of this is true, but a lot of it's not. Like, this isn't to describe the complexity of me. I'm really rebellious. That's not a Taurian trait. Like, I'm bullheaded. That's a Taurian trait. But like, so to sit down and see me in action and have somebody who doesn't know me look at this and say, hey, right. And to be able to explain, well, this planet has these evolutionary purposes, and this planet has these evolutionary purposes. And on this day, they had this kind of aspect going on. And I imagine this is, the kind of energy that was blowing up in you. And it's like, wow, like undeniable. And the funny part is I really was in denial. Like, it was one thing to have somebody read and have a conversation with me about astrology and like go over my natal blueprint and what was going on in my life. It was another thing that I spent, I don't know, last August, so about a year and a half ago, I spent a 4-day immersion with my mentor, and ended up finding out that I was like learning astrology. Like the only way to get to really understand my chart was to understand evolutionary astrology, which I appreciate because, I'm also very independent. That is a Taurus trait. And to be able to like manage and understand myself to that deep level. But I'll be candid. When I came back, there was so much garbage and conversation of not great experiences with astrology over the course of my life. I completely discounted it. And there was probably at least a 2-month period where, as much as I was studying what he was sharing with us, because anybody who's spent that immersion weekend with he and his wife, we'd get together on a weekly basis and still study and learn together. So he was like still giving us homework, and I'm learning, and I'm at the same time, maybe 2 hours of doing homework and understanding what the planets are doing and how they're doing it. And also looking up, why is astrology bullshit? Just debunk astrology. Like, I mean, and that is part of my personality. I don't ever take anything at face value. Like, I trust deeply, but I'm also deeply skeptical.
Same.
And if you see my chart, there's just a lot of polarizations. Like, it makes me understand why I've always experienced myself being the person not on the fence, but able to like bounce back and forth on the fence. This person says this, person says this. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Oh, well, that makes sense. And I'm not indecisive. I can just understand like the complexity of things. Yeah. So anyway, after I got over the skepticism, and there's times it kind of creeps up on me from time to time, but it just keeps coming through every time. I'm like, maybe I can poke a hole in it here. It's just kind of my nature.
Yeah.
Sorry, future partner and husband. That's what I do.
Yeah.
It's not personal. It's just my personality. So that's what really sold me. And there's one particular aspect on my natal chart that affects me perpetually through time. And I won't get like too technical here, but it's my natal sun opposes my midheaven. So my midheaven's in Scorpio. So I relate with a lot of digging in the deep. That's who I am. But it's in a perpetual opposition because of the timing of when I was born. As we move through time, that aspect doesn't, it keeps moving through all of the progressions on the chart too, which means at any given time, my entire chart's kind of lit up with this, you know, do I bring vitality to this, or do I like lean and let other people kind of have the lead? And like learning how to balance that teeter-totter. One of the things I said to my mentor at one point, I was like, you know, I quite literally felt like kind of bipolar throughout my life. And I was never, you know, I've been in therapy and done those things, and I was never diagnosed that. But I kind of just felt like, God, why do I vacillate emotionally so much around some things? The other thing is I also learned that my sun, while it's my most powerful planet, again, this is an evolution, not to get all technical.
Yeah.
It's also natally my most disharmonious, which means for a sun, well, I really like to shine and put the light on the world, and I even like to have it on myself to a certain degree. The disharmony, like the disharmony in it, has me like wanting to hide in the shadows and put everybody else's needs first.
Yeah.
And I couldn't figure out why I couldn't stop doing that in my life. I was like, why? From a Taurus perspective, I remember reading this book once upon a time. Said, you know, you're the kind of person that there'll be the last big cookie on the plate and you'll give it to someone else and you'll be like, I'm fine with the crumbs, and then walk away bitter and resentful and sad because nobody gave you the cookie.
Yeah.
Right? And I was like, damn, that hurts, right? Talk about some shadow work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I want to pause because I think a couple things we should probably define or just make a little more clear. Your sun sign is where you shine, obviously, or maybe not obviously, but it is your vitality. Your sun sign is vitality, right? Like in astrology, those two things are linked. I'm not good at explaining a midheaven. So how would you explain your midheaven? Or
so the midheaven is how people see us and experience us, and it's how we show up in the world. So it's kind of tough because I don't want people to assume this through their own chart. But my sun happens to be polar opposite, so it's underneath the horizon, and so it's only the
right,
people
because Scorpio and Taurus are sister signs, so they're exactly opposite. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's called your IC, right? It's not commonly talked about, but it's a really important part of the chart too. So people's first impression of me is not that I'm like this deeply loving, loyal person. As they get to know me, they will. People's first impression of me is, damn, why did she just ask me like this super deep personal question, and she just met me, and how the fuck did she, okay, that's 4 times. How did she know that, like, you know? And it's so like my first impression, I joke with people like I'm not the person that gets invited to the party to be the life of the party, because
same.
The second I've been around somebody for 30 seconds and either got to pick up on their energy or heard them say 2 sentences and interact with somebody, I'm like, oh, I want to know this. Like, and it's not just like, oh, what kind of car did you buy? It's like, what happened when you fell off your bike and your best friend left you in the middle of the street? I heard you telling that story. Right? And they're like, oh, I was just talking about BMX bikes. And I'm like, no, but what happened? How did you feel about that? Are you still friends with that person? How did that affect your relationships for the rest of your life? And they're like, you just met me. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you are?
So midheaven is whatever sign that it falls under. And it also depends if there's planets in the 10th house, because that kind of will complement it too. Because that's our public image as well. But whatever the sign of the midheaven is, and the planet that supports that sign. So Scorpio is Pluto and Mars.
Yeah.
Right? People first impression is I'm really intense. I don't mean to, but I tend to like rub people pretty aggressively when I first meet them. Mm-hmm. I had to become aware of that. Like, that's also something that's really helpful. I don't stop being who I am, but I read the room differently. I don't just jump right into those conversations. Right? My Mercury's also in Aries, so my communication, like, is I can't tell you how many people that I'm super cool with and close with now that their first impression is like, who the hell are you? Like, and it's so predictable. It's so predictable.
If I had $1 for every time someone, once they got close to me, said, I thought you hated me, I wouldn't need to work anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that one aspect, it's by far the most challenging perpetual aspect on my chart, both natally and just perpetually. Well, I can't say perpetually because at any given time I have a lot of stuff rocking on my chart. It's difficult. It's just really helped me to get to know myself. And it's also just been so healing. There's so much about relationships, especially relationships that feel like family, are really important to me. And it shows on my chart. And I can't say that those historically, up until recently in my life, had turned out the way that I had hoped and dreamed about, upon entrance into this world. And looking at my chart and better understanding how I was reacting and responding to the world, and how people, and then also like one of the best tools that I learned very early on, when I really started getting into coaching, is in my spiritual life coaching program. We did a lot of mirroring work, which is sort of similar to shadow work.
Mm-hmm.
Of whatever you're experiencing, it is you, right? Like, one of the things that came up in my mirroring work once upon a time is we were doing some exercise, and I said, all men are emotionally unavailable. And so my mentor then said, so say, I am emotionally unavailable. And I was like, I am not. I'm the most loving, caring, kind person. And I am that, but I didn't realize how much I was attracting and welcoming people who were sort of emotionally checked out. And I was emotionally checked out. I had no clue like how much I was checked out. And so that work helped me to start building the foundation and learning how to be my first client. Like, that's coaching 101, be your first client.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's interesting. There was one specific thing you said, and I don't remember word for word, but I remember what it made me think of. And Enneagram did the same thing for me when it helped me realize how people perceive me. For anyone who hasn't listened to the Enneagram podcast, you have 9 core types, and really you are a whole person that's made up of all 9, but you have one core type, and it's based off of your core desire and also your core fear, what you're trying to protect. And so you kind of move throughout your whole life with this one core fear motivating all of your behavior and decisions. And so I'm a 1, which means that I'm like the perfectionist. My core desire is to be like morally good, but also right. And not like right, like correct, though I do also enjoy that, but it's more like I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And so my core fear is being told that I'm bad or that I'm not doing the right thing or doing the wrong thing.
I want to spend a little time here as we're starting to wrap up, thinking about, or at least sharing that, how do I want to put this? The tools that we're using now personally, right? Like, let's share some of the stuff with folks so they can hear the examples. Mm-hmm. What kind of tools are we using, and why are we using them, and what kind of future self? Like, I know that's not something we can cover in 2 minutes a piece, but like, just to give an example of like why the stuff is still important to us now. We both have been doing the work for a lifetime. So
Well, if I were to try and concisely say this, I would say Enneagram gives me a point to check in, because I have had this tool now for a while. I'm intimately familiar with the language of it, with what it looks like. I can point to the unhealthy baseline and growth behaviors. I also, again, this is specific to Enneagram, but you have your core type, and then you also have your line of stress. So the number you take on in stress, and then your line of growth, the number you take on in growth. And kind of something I was going to say anyway was, before understanding the tools, and I'm thinking back when I was a kid and I envisioned what I wanted to be like when I grew up. I wanted to be successful, and I was very goals driven, and, I had a lot of motivation and drive, but I also wanted to be able to relax. Like, I wanted to be able to let loose and have fun. And that is struggle for me. My growth arrow is 7. and seven's whole thing is happiness and joy and being light. And so again, having that connection of like, oh, okay, this is possible for me. I just have to lean into those healthy behaviors. And so again, having this tool for a long time, like you said, the work never really goes away. You just start to be able to see where you're, you kind of get like you're moving the goalpost in a good way, not the negative way, but you're like, okay, I reached here. Now I get to attain this new thing, because when you get to this new level, your new version of yourself, you're not ever going to be perfect. You're always a work in progress. And I think too, there are some situations where no matter how prepared you are, no matter how much work you've done, it's still going to launch you right back to that starting point sometimes. But this time it's going to be different getting back from that, because you've done all the work already and you already have all the tools. So, Enneagram is something I still lean on. Astrology is something now that I've like super incorporated into like my tools. And especially with Aquarius, and Pluto and Aquarius, I feel like I've leaned more into the collective astrology too, of how it's kind of affecting everybody. And then also, again, now that I have a name for shadow work, kind of realizing what I'm doing and starting to put that outward, because now that I realize that I've kind of been the master of shadow work this whole time, now I feel like I can help other people reach this as well. So your tools can be not just for yourself, but also for other people. Parenting. I feel like I've learned all these tools earlier on, and it's only going to make me show up more efficiently for my kid, because now I'm going to recognize, I know his chart. So it's like, okay, I can see, Bless, he has a little Cancer moon. So I know how that shows up and what that looks like. And so I can take that into account moving forward. And not to say that I'm going to let these things shape him. I still want him to shape himself and the world around him. But you can show up better to support not just your kid, but other people. After you've learned about these tools.
Our dear friend Lisa is a Cancer moon, and learning how to show up for her when she's in those moments. Which it does help a lot. Show up for ourselves and show up for the people around us. That's what it's all about. I'll say for me that I look back at the version of myself that used to set those goals and achieve them, but I really wasn't happy, and I felt accomplished, but I was like, something's just really missing, right? And then I arrive at this point in my life where I've got this blank slate, and I finally, like, evolutionary astrology comes into my life. I see what's happening here, and it also helped me to understand not just my present moment, but what I really wanted for my future. I didn't ever have the dream of like having a 5-bedroom house and a husband and 3 kids and a white picket fence and a dog, right? I mean, my stuff was actually kind of unusual. I'm like, I'd love to have a great life partner, but I don't know that I want to live in the same house with them. And if we did have kids, maybe we had 2 houses and the kids were in the middle house, and we figured out it, like, just completely not conventional, right? And that a lot of that is in my chart too. But there was beyond that, at the point that things really took a turn for me, I would say probably in my late 20s, and then really again in my late 30s, is I was like, I am so exhausted by doing work for other people, and I don't understand why I'm burning out. And I learned some things. I learned a lot. So the short of it is, my North Node is actually in my 12th house, which is bringing things to endings and beginnings, but it's also the opposite of where my South Node was. And I know I'm getting a little technical here, but that South Node is in the sign of Cancer, which is super sensitive, right? And I've like really learned and understood that story. That's a house of like servitude, and like really like talk about player coach, right? Like boots to the ground, doing the hard work. And I felt that from past lives. I felt that in this life, right? I don't even need to go in a past life. This life. And in astrology, right, that North Node is who and what our soul is aspiring to be and become. When I got to understand that North Node, it helped me to realize that what I really wanted to do was to show up in the world and be the example. I didn't really know how to define that until the last 5 years of my life. And once I've been able to define that, it's helped me to better understand how and why I set up my coaching practice the way I have, why I have the relationships that I do now, why I had to let some of the relationships in my life go. And maybe we come back together again at another time, maybe we don't, right? But I understand why they existed when they did. And now I know why I'm showing up the way I am now. And it really, like, I can look at 85-year-old Jenny and I can see who I'm meant to become. And this helps me to stay the course on that. And it also, like I said, I have some hard aspects, a lot of hard aspects on my chart at any given time. And for folks that don't know what that is, it just means things are a little tougher to put it, or a lot tougher.
Yeah.
And it,
The energies.
given it takes more energy to navigate those feelings and experiences that are coming up in life. And that has really humbled me in learning how to, in this time where I've watched one of the things that I've been sharing with people for the last 20 years, whether I was doing spiritual life coaching or executive coaching or career coaching, or now the transformation coaching, which is the umbrella that I go under now, is really asking people, like, are you satisfied with how much work you're putting into the world? Like, are you doing the work that you're worthy of? Is it giving you the energy back? How full is your battery? Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's one of the gifts that I get to give in this world. Right. Is that own self-reflection and understanding how to navigate that and to really create the life that we desire and deserve. And that's because the tools, like the introspection and the curiosity, got me a long way on my own. And I mean, even the Enneagram, the more I'm learning from you and Lisa on this, like it's a really nice complementary tool that gets a little bit sharper when I don't have time to like do the mathematics and the calculations of what's happening on the chart. Be like, oh, I'm leaning into this. Okay, got it. Right, can make a decision and move on the spot. And I mean, we all deserve to be able to create. The one thing we do have power over is making a choice.
Yeah.
And until we understand how we are responding, thinking, and believing and feeling about things, and have that introspection, it's really hard to create who we want to be. Just reactive all the time. And that's, we've all had experience with that. Nobody likes being in that zone.
And to add what you said, because I just realized, obviously, this all stemmed from talking about future self. But just to dig a little bit into the past, even evolutionary astrology, Enneagram, whatever tool you pick up, human design, hopefully you get to a point too where you have sympathy for yourself. You give yourself a little bit of slack, and maybe I'm speaking to people who are too hard on themselves, because that's the camp that I fall into. But hopefully you can look at these things and say, okay, I have a reason I can forgive myself, and now I know better, and I can move on and move forward with more educated, more informed, hopefully with a better attitude, but also hopefully with a lot more self-love. I mean, hopefully you have gotten to the bottom of that, and you're like, that inner child, little Daniela, is down there, and she's like, oh, hey, like underneath all these little, like, in the dark, in like a closet somewhere, and you're like, oh, come out, it's okay. Hopefully you get to that too, because you have to take your inner child with you.
And again, we're in this time where, historically, going back generations, holding a position of love and compassion and vulnerability, people, our parents didn't think they had time for that, right? And truth be told, the way the universe was evolving at that time, they might not have had that much time for it. And here we are. Like, humans are forever expanding. Right? Like you said at the beginning of the podcast, It's just something to me that wants better, wants to be better, do better, right? That's expansion. And here we are being able to be that love and compassion and vulnerability, and understand that like that is like true strength versus putting up the defenses, and defenses are destructive, right? Unless you're playing football, then
Yeah.
defense is great. But yeah, So, and a couple closing remarks here. Something that I would like to ask our audience is, whether you see this today or you come across this podcast 7 years from now, I'd like to hear what tools that you've used and how they've worked for you, or even how they haven't worked for you, right? I've certainly had some tools that failed me. I'm not going to name them here because there's all some, validity, but there's been a couple tools that I've used over the years where I'm like, this is only helping other people manage me. This isn't helping me manage me.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm curious what people's experience has been with tools. And as we're building out the Treehouse, if you're getting this 7 years from now and you still don't see a mod, some sort of tool that you've heard of, or you just think all the tools that are available through the Treehouse don't apply to you or just don't seem to tap in, tell us what you need so we can start exploring the universe and find the people and the experts out there. Like this is an expansive field, and we want to find what actually syncs up and works for you. So that's my call to our audience. What do you have, Daniela? Anything you want to add to that?
I would just say we want it. I mean, like if there's a group of people asking you to do more work or something, like, do not feel bad. We enjoy this. Like, please give me another tool to lean into and learn about myself. And, whether I come out of it loving it or hating it, I guarantee you I enjoyed the process of getting to know it because I'm weird. So I
Me
just
too.
really like, please give us,
I'm like, what is that? What does it do? Tell me more. Yes. I want to take it. Show me how it works. Yes. We are in a time, astrologically speaking, where this is the time where the tools are being created and coming back from ancient times. So it has probably existed some other time, just needs to be pulled back out of the archives.
Right.
Yeah. And in the meantime, I have a stack of, I'm not kidding, Daniela, I think there's like 20 different tools there. I was like, oh, I forgot I did this. Oh my God. It's like, I got to stop looking at all this stuff before the podcast. I'm going to go down a rabbit hole and miss our start time today. So yeah, there's a lot of tools out there.
I do the same thing. Yeah. I don't know. We'll be here reading and talking about them more. You just keep bringing them to us.
Yeah. Well, thank you folks for coming to visit us again today. And we look forward to hearing back from you, and see you next week.
Thanks for joining us in the Treehouse today. If you enjoyed your time here, can you do us one little favor and send this episode over to someone else who might need to hear it? We love ratings, reviews, and recommendations. We appreciate you so much. Have a gorgeous day.